British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is finally getting the elections he wants. The opposition Labour Party has backed his plan for polls in December to break a stalemate on Brexit in the House of Commons.
And there is only one way to get Brexit done in the face of this unrelenting parliamentary obstructionism, this endless, willful, fingers crossed, not me gov refusal to deliver on the mandate of the people, and that is, Mr. Speaker, to refresh this Parliament and give the people a choice.
Like the government, many believe the polling could be the push that gets Brexit over the line.
I think we've just got to bring this to some sort of resolution. So I think we've had many votes in the last 12 months in Parliament, and I think the general election might be a way to sort this all out.
Yeah, I think we need to clear the House, get it done and dusted, and I think that people are a little bit fed up of just overall impasse.
Johnson says he's confident his Conservative Party will regain the majority it lost after he took office. And his optimism may be justified. The latest polls suggest the Tories would win comfortably, but the opposition seems unfazed, saying it believes it can take control.
So we're going to go out there with the biggest campaign this party has ever mounted, totally united, totally determined, and I'm absolutely looking forward to going every part of this country with my wonderful shadow cabinet team here and all the fantastic Labour activists to give a message of hope.
If Labour wins, Jeremy Corbyn says he'll push for a second Brexit referendum to get voter approval for any deal he negotiates with Brussels. In Corbyn's plan, an option to cancel the result of the 2016 referendum and remain in the EU would also be on the ballot. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
And for more on this, Iain Begg joins us now from London. He's a professorial research fellow at the London School of Economics European Institute. Welcome back to the programme, Iain. Now, as we know, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been doggedly pursuing this idea of an early election in December. Why is he so convinced that this will get Brexit over the line?
Well, good evening, Oscar. The reason he's convinced is that he thinks that he can gain a majority and thereby pass his version of Brexit, which has been thwarted up to now by Parliament. He does not currently have a majority in Parliament. He thinks that by holding a general election, he will win at least half the seats and therefore no longer be constrained by all these people who are conspiring to stop him.
Yes, now, as we know, Boris Johnson is ahead in the polls at the moment. Labour is trailing the Conservatives in terms of the likelihood of an election victory. But we also know that polls in the UK haven't been also accurate in recent years, from the Scottish referendum to general elections under Theresa May. Do you think it is a sure thing for the Conservatives if an election were to be held in December?
And no, it's not at all a sure thing for a number of reasons. First, it's likely to be a four-party election rather than the usual two-party election with a couple of fringe parties. There is a Brexit party headed by Nigel Farage, which is very opposed to the deal that Boris has brought back from Brussels. And the Liberal Democrats, who are very much in favour of remaining in the EU, look as though they're going to increase their position. Now, all of this is complicated by the British system, which is a very strict first-past-the-post operated seat by seat. Unless you gain the highest share of the vote in a particular seat, you don't win the seat. It's nothing to do with the national ratios, it's seat by seat. And that can make a big difference where there's a four-way contest.
Now, Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition leader, says he's now thrown his support behind the idea of an early election after the EU officially granted the UK a 3-month delay to Brexit. What are Labour's chances in all this? Should they feel confident about the outcome of an early election?
Well, as we look at it now, Labour seems to have no chance whatsoever. But the same was said in 2017 when Theresa May called an election and Labour was trailing by 20 points in the polls. Corbyn has this idea that he's a great campaigner and he only needs to stand up in front of an audience and suddenly the votes will sweep in his direction. I think he's deluding himself, but we still have the possibility that things could change quite radically as a campaign unfolds. That's exactly what we saw in 2017.
Now, as we heard in that story, the Labour leader would likely call for another referendum, a so-called people's vote. We know, as you say, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP are against Brexit. They would likely push for one as well. But what is the likelihood of having another vote on Brexit?
Well, another vote, another referendum was one of the possibilities at this point. But what the political system now seems to have agreed on is to go for the general election, and whoever wins that general election will then decide the next step. If it's Boris Johnson, there's no chance of a second referendum. If it's a hung parliament with enough of the parliament made up of parties who are in favour of a further referendum, then such a further referendum becomes more likely. So there's not an easy answer to your question today. It's wait and see what the election outcome is.
Now, in the meantime, we know markets are continuing to be rattled by this ongoing uncertainty. They've had their ups and downs in recent months, depending on any given Brexit development. But what does this added layer of uncertainty, potential early elections, mean for the corporate sector, but also for the markets in the UK?
Well, for both markets and the corporate sector, it means further 3 months of uncertainty. It means not knowing whether the likely direction next can be predicted, because you cannot really predict the outcome of the election at this point. So all of this feeds into the concern that the corporate sector has that things are just not going to be settled. And they will even be fearing that suppose there is another hung parliament, then we're into a new phase of all of this in which nobody can really predict what would happen beyond it, except that it wouldn't have a clear outcome on Brexit.
And just looking at the finer detail of what might be debated in Parliament in terms of this idea of an early election, there are this proposal to lower the voting age to include, I guess, more people in any general election, and also to open up the vote to EU nationals, which would be quite unprecedented. Clearly, these ideas are designed to stymie any idea of another poll. I mean, how likely are those to get up in Parliament?
Well, it looks already as though the amendment which would have allowed 16 and 17-year-olds and European citizens to vote has not been selected by the Speaker, which means it will not be put as an amendment this evening. And to me, that says we're going to have the general election on conventional British rules, which exclude both Europeans and 16 and 17-year-olds. That seems to be the breaking news that's just happened.
Oh, interesting. Okay, Iain Begg, we'll have to leave it there, but you know, ever-changing situation as always when it comes to Brexit. Thank you so much for your analysis.